I was privileged enough to work with Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso back in, goodness, it must have been 2007 when I joined Vodafone Global, and they were the two drivers for the Vodafone McLaren Mercedes team. And it was such a brilliant time in F1. And it was Lewis's first season back then. And it was actually, so we started Formula One at the same time. Obviously, his career has done way better than mine.
He drives a little faster than you, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. But we had the pleasure from a partner perspective, being title partner, working with him just when he started. And he was incredible. He was a young driver, but I always remember this humility that he had and this sort of real kind of say it how it is and be true to yourself. Even back then, this confidence that he had within him to do the right thing and to say what he believed was the right thing.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Put yourself in these shoes for just a minute. You walk into your first day at a new job at a major bank. Pretty nice, huh? But wait, there's more. It's during an economic crisis. Your bank just received a £40 billion bailout. And oh yeah, you're in charge of sports sponsorships, not seen as a necessity for all that funding now coming out of taxpayers' pockets. That's where my next guest found herself. And by surviving and even thriving through it, she told me she learned this lesson. You must be a master of yourself during uncertain times. Here to share a behind-the-scenes look at that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories from throughout her career, is Louise Johnson, the global CEO of Fuse. Thanks for joining me, Louise.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to tell our audience just a quick background about you so they know who we're listening to. Louise was in charge of global sports sponsorships for Vodafone and Royal Bank of Scotland. For the past 15 years, she's been at Fuse. Fuse is part of Omnicom, which reported $14.7 billion in revenue in 2023. And Louise is a board director at Omnicom Media Group UK and manages a team of 400 at Fuse. So Louise, what is your day like as global CEO and board member?
So it can be very varied. We are in January at the moment, so we're in the process of our final plans. We submit our final plans for 2025. So a lot of commercial and business strategy combined with clients. I spend a lot of time with clients. They are the most important people to us. And really at this time of year, I spend a lot of time with them understanding their business strategies and needs for the year ahead. What's keeping them up at night? How can we help? How are we delivering on what we should be delivering on? But also, how are we really looking ahead on their business plans as well? But then, of course, we work within the Omnicom world. So we get invited to work on lots of different media accounts or creative accounts. And I recently was invited to join a panel in CES with my parent company, Omnicom Media Group, where we were talking about transformation within content and gaming and sport. And I was delighted to be on a panel with Martha Stewart. So completely varied. And then, you can be going to talk to rights holders. We go to see UEFA regularly. I was in Paris recently to see a whole host of rights holders. And then yesterday I was hosting a book launch for our chairman. So it's really varied, but with all of the outwardly facing roles as a CEO was required to do, I do love spending time with my people and my employees, and having that reverse mentoring for them, because you spend so much time with people you work with. They're like your family in the end. So I get a huge amount of enjoyment with spending people that are in the office with me.
Reverse mentoring is such a great term. So you went from, I was just on the stage with Martha Stewart to I'm having these people mentor me. And that's great. I think we're going to get to one of those lessons about reverse mentoring in here. But let's start here with some of the lessons from some of the things you made. Your first lesson you said is instill emotional discipline. So how did you learn this lesson?
So during the pandemic, and I've actually had to kind of pivot through a couple of different crises over my career, including the financial crisis and then the pandemic. And I think you're in sort of uncharted waters with these different crises. And I think it's really important as us to understand that it's not our fault. We didn't do these crises. So therefore, you need to have an element of emotional control and actually work out what you can control and what you can't control. And I think it's actually called the locus of control, and embrace what you can control, understand that and communicate it to your people around you, and start to really role model that it's better to take a step forward in the time of crisis versus no step forward. So I think it's really understanding your own emotions, putting it against actually what's happening with the larger economic and business environment, and then really start to break it down. So I think that's one of the things around understanding to be more disciplined with your emotion, but also how you show up as well in front of your people. And I think, during the pandemic, it was really important to communicate to all of your agency. And one way that we really wanted to do that was spend more one-to-one time with the board, but also people of all different levels. And because you're working at home, you just didn't have that. You couldn't walk the halls anymore, So actually being able to be in contact with your agency was so crucial for you to develop as a person and a leader during that time, because you were hearing all of those challenges from, the grassroots up, essentially. So it was really important for us to spend that one-to-one time to understand, like, what are we doing well? What aren't we doing well? What can we be doing more for those people and for the agency? But also to build up those connections and those friendships as well.
Yeah. So one of the things when we talk about this instill emotional discipline, and part of that is kind of having a certain level of positivity and optimism no matter what's going on. I wonder, how do you also bring authenticity into that? Right. Because I ask, because authenticity is a topic. It comes up time and again on How I Made It Marketing. We use that term. To me, it's just a very general term. What does that even mean? And so I really like to unpack and get underneath it with people. For example, when I interviewed Diego Osorio, the founder and chief creative officer at Lobos 1707 Tequila, on How I Made It Marketing, one of his lessons is authenticity should be at the core of a brand. Right. So, but I want to talk about a tequila brand versus an agency brand, right? Because a tequila brand, it made sense. They have a 400-year family history. There's some really clear authenticity there. For an agency brand, the authenticity, a lot of it is the people itself, right? And when you talk about instilling emotional discipline in these difficult times, as a CEO of an agency, I mean, frankly, sometimes it's just bad news, right? I mean, I've been laid off in an agency. There's definitely a lot of employment flux because you're serving clients, acquisitions, all sorts of things can happen. So I wonder how you balance that, emotional discipline, that positivity, that optimism, with that authenticity with your employees who are your brand, when sometimes, I mean, it's just, you just don't have good news to share with them.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, people talk about being an authentic leader a lot. And you sort of go, well, what does that actually mean?
Exactly, right?
What does that mean? And I think for me, it goes back to our late founder. So an amazing guy called David Pinnington. He set up Fuse, who I worked with in my previous company at Vodafone Global. He came over to set up a sports division at Omnicom during the financial crisis, and no other agencies were putting media and sports marketing together to create something really unique at that time. And unfortunately, he passed away sort of, when he was quite young due to lung cancer, and, an incredible man, built up a fantastic business. And we felt that when he passed away, we really had to continue to bring his legacy to life. And those values from him that we have instilled in the leadership team and our agency are built around being trusted advisors, being restless, like don't take a cut and paste for a client. You've got to keep pushing and seeing what's next. Being collaborative, because we have to be collaborative with our agencies and clients, but we work as part of a network group. You've got to collaborate. And committed, like you've got to finish the job. And I think four simple values have been in the agency that we live and breathe for the last 15 years. And those principles I actually sort of have in my personal life as well, because I think you can't be one thing at work and then one thing at home as well. So I think for me, that's being authentic. I'm not a different person at work and at home. So I think that's the first one, like actually bring those to life, keep it simple and bring it to life. I also think, for me, it's just being me as well. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm bad at. And I'm not pretending to be something that I'm bad at. And I will be really honest with people around that. I'll say, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. And this is where I need you to come in and help and sort of be brilliant. So I think just being really honest with people and on telling them, if you know something, what you can tell them and what you can't tell them. And again, going back to the pandemic, it was really difficult because you only knew a certain amount. We were only allowed to share a certain amount from the broader business. But I think being able to tell your agency, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, and this is what might come. And I think that really resonated well with our teams. And I remember lots of people coming up to me saying, thank you. Thank you so much for over communicating. Even if you didn't have anything new to share, you were still telling us updates and timings. All my friends who work in different agencies have been kept in the dark for months of what's going on. We really appreciate you just telling us and being candid with what you know and you don't know. So I think it's small things like that that are being authentic, like treat people how you want to be treated. And for me, I think that is the most important thing. Work hard, be nice to people, simple.
Yeah. Well, what you know and what you don't know, that's a great kind of, I don't know, I don't have a good word thing to use, because the what you know can be helpful sometimes, because I know it's definitely, you see like in a bigger company, employees are like, why the heck are they doing this or that? And obviously you can't share everything, but when you can share what you know behind the scenes, like, okay, maybe that decision makes more sense. And the what you don't know too is, I know definitely in difficult times, and COVID is something we frequently talk about lately, right? But there's other difficult times. It's just a difficult time for your industry, your business, all these things. People do want to like grab onto something. And sometimes you have to be honest of like, okay, this is what we don't know. Like you said, your locus of control. Let's focus on what we can control. This is what we don't know. Obviously, we don't know it either. You don't know, we don't know it. But let's find a way to go forward. So I like that kind of two sides of a dyad, maybe that you talked about. So that was a great agency example, but we have both agency and brand side marketers that listen. This is a great example from the brand side of something you had to face. You must be a master of yourself during uncertain times. So COVID is a very interesting time you went through, but you also went through that economic crisis and you're at a brand at that time. So can you walk us through how you did that?
Yes. Okay. So I left Vodafone, which was the creme de la creme of sports sponsorship at the time in the noughties, and that time, brands and advertising agencies were really starting to take sports seriously as a driver for growth. And I got offered a bigger role to go over to RBS, which was a very big banking group centered in London at the time. And I literally walked in on day one, and in the hallway of this huge building in the city, it had £80 billion bailout on Sky News across all the TV screens. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? £80 billion bailout of RBS Bank. And I had my new boss calling me saying, don't worry, don't worry about the TV screens and the news that you can read. You've still got a job. And I remember I had my brother at the same time phoning me saying, walk out, do not go upstairs. And I was like, oh my God, I've got a contract, I've signed a contract. What do I do? Now, of course, I continued. I went up the lift and did that job, and I did that job for 18 months. And it was fascinating because, RBS was one of the main reasons why the financial crisis happened in the UK and then subsequent markets as well. And the sports sponsorship platform, I came in to be developing a new one. So we'd been in Formula One. We were going to go and do a title partnership with a new team. We were looking at new properties. Actually, the job that I was now doing was complete opposite. The sort of CMO said to me, right, okay, see what contracts you can get out of, reduce everything that you can, sack all the agencies. Oh, and by the way, you're going to be working with Downing Street and the Prime Minister, because the impact of coming out of some of these properties could have an impact on the economy. You were like, oh, okay. So no new contracts then. But actually, in this situation, it was fascinating because you learn more in a crisis than you do anywhere. And I think actually this was such a pivotal time in my career. And I think the things that I took away from it, and where you have to be as the master of yourself on this, is that one, you're having to show up in a different way in London versus the HQ of RBS, which was in Edinburgh. And you go up to Edinburgh once every 2 weeks, and your team up there were part of the bank since it started 20 years ago. They had all their shares been, bonuses put into shares. They'd lost all the lot, a huge amount of money they'd lost. And they hadn't really kind of fathomed that this small business, which had gone global, had now completely collapsed. So you were going into a leadership position where you had to be incredibly empathetic, really over communicating why that we were now completely changing the way that we were working, workshopping, taking people along on this journey. And then you come back to London and you were having to be, right, no emotions, go, 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 action, action, action. So it's a very different leadership skill that you had to adopt. But also it's very high paced as well. And I think at that point, I really realized that I need to take care of myself because it was so high paced and so, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, uncharted waters, because no one had ever been in this. So you kind of go to work with a base plan and that get completely knocked out by about, 10:30 because, some journalists had picked up something that we were now on the front cover on, on the Times or the FT. So I think for me, it was really important to understand how do I keep myself healthy and well and sort of fed and watered. So that was one thing, like really taking a step back to look at self-care, because if I was turning up to work frazzled, that was not going to be the right attitude or, showing up to the rest of the team in the right way. So I think for me, it was like, how do I manage my own internal crisis? I need to feel good. I need to sleep. I need to be exercising and I need to be nourishing myself. So I think that was a really important piece. I can't go in to flex my leadership skills to get the job done if I am not, looking after myself. So that's a really important thing. And I still do that today. There are times where I can feel slightly burnt out or frazzled, or, I'm taking a meeting that I'm getting annoyed in. And you just have to sort of slightly take yourself back and go, right, let's both go back to all the good principles of, sleeping, eating, acupuncture, boxing, all the stuff that I love and gives me that energy.
Yes, that's true in good and bad times. I love that. But let me unpack. I think you did such a smart thing about understanding your audience, right? You talked about the audience in Edinburgh. You talked about the audience in London. You're talking about those, internal employees understanding that audience as a good communicator should. Let me ask you about the actual audience of the customer, right? So you went from Vodafone, you went to RBS. Did you got out of some sports sponsorships, but you still had some. Did you change the messaging in the sports sponsorships at all based on what was going on? And let me say, for example, during COVID, I wrote an article called An Inspiration Guide for Uncertain Times, right? Because again, it's uncertain, but come on, we can still do this. There's things we can do. One of the tips I talked about was consider the environment in which the customer experiences your message, right? And so I'm so curious, Vodafone, before you said like these high salad days, there was a certain environment, I'm sure a certain message worked. Now you're coming to this RBS situation. Did you pivot the message in any way?
Yes, absolutely. And you had to. It was such a different world. People were attacking RBS for spending now taxpayers' money on sports sponsorships. So, of course, a contract's a contract, and there was a certain amount that you could get out of and a certain amount that you couldn't. And also, you had all these businesses that were reliant on partnership money. And I think that's an important thing to note, that a huge amount of rights holders are dependent on commercial partnerships money to keep going or to provide routes to grassroots and sustainability. So it's really important that you can't, just switch off something ASAP because that might impact a sport or an NGB or rights holder. But we did completely. We changed the branding. So within the group, there was a huge amount of other brands. So we looked at kind of a portfolio of brands, and actually the brands might needed a boost through actually some of this fantastic portfolio that they had, the legacy portfolio. How could we use a different brand to tell a different message to drive their business forward that would ultimately then help pay back the taxpayer in the long run? So that was very much the sort of, okay, well, where could you rebrand using the existing portfolio? Step two was within that, what is that message? It's around community, it's around grassroots, it's around, enabling a better way. And the third piece was, what could you do for your employees? Because as an RBS employee, of course, it was incredibly difficult to go to work every day. And actually, how do you do an inside out strategy that is building up that confidence again as an employee and coming to work with pride? So what we had left was, a good way of really doing that, connecting with customers again, connecting with your internal customer and audience again, to really see how you can start building up confidence and a sense of a new community for a new banking era.
Great. So we talked about probably two of the most difficult times in my career and in most careers, people listening, right? The economic crisis with the banks, the COVID crisis. Let's talk about something kind of on a more positive level, like this how the world's been changing over the past few decades, especially in your industry. You say, be restless and challenge the status quo. I think it would be fair to say you are a pioneer in your industry. And so can you give us a sense of how stepping into your industry, how you were restless, challenge the status quo, from when you were in there in the early days as, one of the few women leaders to where things are today?
Yeah, sure. And thank you. So, for a long time, I was one of the only female CEOs in Europe for sports marketing. It's predominantly a male dominated industry, rightly or wrongly. I think I'm the only global CEO, female global CEO now in the sports industry. And with that becomes lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities. And I think what I have always tried to do, and my female leadership team at Fuse have always tried to do, is one, making sure that we are not trying to copy, what we should be doing as men, but also making sure that we're opening up the pathways for more females to get into the sports marketing industry. And I'm really proud that actually my board now is 66% female. The SLT is 60% female, and actually the overall business is around I think it's just almost 60 as well. So we've done a really good job in terms of moving that forward and increasing the numbers to make it's actually over-indexing now on female equality, which is fantastic. And I think also because it's been such an exciting time in women's sports over the last 3 to 5 years, and you've seen this incredible rise. And I take a huge amount of inspiration from these amazing female athletes who are doing it in their own way. They are challenging the status quo every day by getting on that pitch, scoring and winning. And in the UK, the women's team, the Lionesses, they won the Euros in 2022. It was just absolutely incredible. And everything they did, they just did it in their own way. The way they celebrated, the way that they, spoke to their audiences on social media, the way that they challenged the government afterwards about how to get, more girls playing football at school and stuff like that. And I think, again, it just really resonated with me, the fact that, these women are incredible athletes who need to be celebrated in their own right. And us as marketeers should be doing that. We shouldn't just be talking about a parity story, which is, of course, very important, but actually using these amazing athletes and these sports as creative storytelling vehicles in their own right as well. And we started to see that a little bit in Cannes last year when I was president of the sports jury. And we awarded lots of work, including the Grand Prix, to some fantastic work around women's sport. But coming back to, I think, me and my team, what we try and do is really instill that within our agency. Don't try and be something you're not. Really embrace the qualities that you have as a female and really lead on that. And I think women have got some fantastic qualities as female. We're much more empathetic than men. How do you lean into that? We might be seen as emotional, but that's actually not wrong. We're not going to rock up to a meeting and cry. That's just, that's completely wrong, a misrepresentation of what females are. But actually, we're more emotionally tuned, and actually, you can be more you can sort of tune into different people's emotions in a different way to use that to craft very collaborative strategies. So I think that's really the message. How do you lean into your unique qualities, your superpowers as a female leader?
So speaking into leaning into superpowers as a female leader, a superpower female leader is Martha Stewart, right? You just mentioned that you were on the stage with her at CES, and I wonder if there's anything you learned up close being there with Martha Stewart. Obviously, you just shared some great lessons, very sports centric, but general lessons there too. I think Martha Stewart's maybe a more general business lesson. And one of the things that I've admired from Martha Stewart, I haven't followed her career very closely, honestly. But the thing that I have seen is she knows how to build and tap into an audience. And I love the term audience because I think as marketers, sometimes we talk too much about customers, or I hate this word, consumers, right? Like there's these human beings walking around, their whole purpose in the world is to consume, and we need to give them the thing to consume. But what Martha did, I think, is truly build first an audience, through TV, print, different ways, and then build products of value to sell to that audience. From what I could see externally, again, I don't really have any inside knowledge there, but we're in a very unique place. You were here in the States at CES. You were on stage with Martha. So what did you learn from just seeing her up close for that short amount of time?
Oh my gosh, she's a total legend. She's 83. Not only does she looks incredible, but the energy and aura around her was incredible. She was absolutely such a lovely lady to sort of connect with before we did the panel. But on the panel, it was really interesting because, she's been going for such a long time, and I've been so billed as the original influencer, which, she really embraces. And I think one thing she said that really resonated with me and audiences, because a lot of CES was around AI. Artificial intelligence was the word du jour. It was everything. And she was saying, look, with technology, where they've been successful is that they've always embraced the new technology where her audience is. So even if rightly or wrongly they've got it wrong, they've always tried to trial new technology, whether that be back in the day a new magazine format or a radio show, or now it's a podcast. She's on TikTok, she's on Instagram. And we were joking about actually, in the next 5 years, would you have Martha Stewart as your personal digital assistant on your handset, telling you how to cook? And, I think she was like, use it or lose it. It's there to be used. And I think that's where she has been so successful over her, 30, 40-year career, is because she has embraced technology. She's embraced the fact that you need to go where your audiences are now going. And I think that's probably been sort of her sort of secret to her success.
I think that's a great example. Like, have that value proposition and know what that value proposition is. That's one thing, but then the package you delivering it can and should vary over time. So that's fantastic. We just talked about some lessons from some of the things that Louise built. In just a moment, we're going to talk about some lessons from some of the people that she was inspired by and built it with, because that's the great thing we get to do as marketers. We build things and we build it with people. But before we get there, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. Join us for our next free event, how to take a conversion marketing approach to agentic AI and RAG with zero tech skills, on February 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, taught by our CEO, Flint McLaughlin. You can register for free at meclabsai.com/conversion. That's MECLABSAI.com/conversion. Okay. So Louise, let's take a look at some of the people that have really you've collaborated with, that have inspired you throughout your career. You mentioned Martha for that interaction you recently had, but someone else that came up was Nancy Cohen. And you mentioned that what you learned from Nancy was you cannot fail unless you quit. So how'd you learn this lesson? How'd you apply this lesson?
So I read the book by Nancy, Forged in Crisis. And I actually was lucky enough to be taught by her at Omnicom University, an amazing course taught by Harvard Business School professors, which my parent company put me on a few years ago. Incredible professor. And she's read quite a few books around what does it mean to be a modern day leader. And Forged in Crisis is around these stories of the courageous leaders from, Abraham Lincoln to various different people, to Martin Luther King. And I think this quote was really from Abraham Lincoln in her book, and it's huge. It's definitely not one to take with you on holiday. It's keep it by your bed kind of book, because it's very big, but brilliant. And I just thought, that's so true. If you don't try, you're never going to know. How can you possibly fail unless you try it? And I think during the pandemic, I read it, and it was really useful because, again, no one's telling you what to do because no one's been here before. And I'm a big believer of taking a step forward than no step forward. And I think reading that book just really affirmed that, do you know what I mean? Just go with your instincts, just take that step forward, because unless you actually start, you're never going to know. So for me, that was really, really important. And especially when, during that time, you had sport closed for the first time since World War II. I remember just the news kind of coming in of Champions League stopping, Formula One stopping, basketball stopping. And I had my head in my hands just going, oh my God, what are we going to do? It's just like, crap, this is awful. The whole business, we had 50 events that we were activating throughout the whole summer. All of that got scrapped. And actually you're like, okay, well, this isn't my fault. I haven't done this. How do we turn this into a positive? And, actually the client relationships that we had by helping him through this became so much stronger. You had so much research and development that we did that, again, our product line came out of it so much stronger. You really look at yourself when things aren't going well. You really look deep down to go, okay, why isn't something going well? When you're successful, you just kind of go and grow. And you never really stop to think, oh, hang on a minute, that sort of division over there, I'm not actually sure if that's as profitable as it should be. But when things aren't going well, when you are in something like a pandemic or a financial crisis, you do stop and you go, okay, let's look under the bonnet of everything. And again, I think for me, that was really interesting because there were a few elements of the business that we now don't have because they weren't as strong as other parts. So for me, it was another learning of, you have to constantly evaluate yourself. You can't wait for a big crisis to go, oh, hang on a minute, that's not working. So how do you instill that culture of check and challenging yourself, even in the good times? And again, that's been quite a big move in terms of our culture and our behavior. Check and challenge, check and challenge, check and challenge. Because that's, I think, what's going to keep you agile and interesting to clients and, motivating for employees as well.
Well, let's talk about that check and challenge and you cannot fail unless you quit. So we've talked a lot about these kind of macro crises so far. And as you mentioned, like when the sports got shut down with COVID, that's not our fault. But do you have any specific examples of when a brand or your agency or something failed a customer and how you handled that, right? Because in fairness, there are some fails that are maybe not our individual faults, but our brand's faults and our agency's faults. And for example, we've published data before about what happens when, a brand fails a customer. And for the people that had the biggest average social network sizes, so you might call those influencers, whatever you want to call them, the number one thing they said was, I actively tried to disparage the business that delivered a failed customer experience every chance I got through social media and other online publishing channels, right? And this is not that everyone did, but that was what the biggest group said. And this is the thing we have to look out for. So I love that you cannot fail unless you quit, because, okay, we start with a fail. It's going to happen. Your brand, your agency, whoever is going to fail customers sometimes. But then I like the unless you quit part. So then what do you do? Take us, I don't know if you have an example you could share, take us, okay, after that fail, now here's what I did to communicate, to make it clear, to make it right, whatever, because we don't want influencers or any people spreading around, right, these negative experiences that they had with our brand. We want positive word of mouth.
God, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of an example where we have failed like that.
Or even a brand you're working with. Because one thing I'll say also while you're thinking of that is another thing we've researched is what we call customer first marketing. And one thing we did is we took a set of 2,400 customers here in the States, not in the UK, with Nielsen, and we split them into two groups of 1,200. Half of them we said, tell us about a company that you had a positive experience with. Half of them we said, tell us about a company you had a negative experience with. And we asked them a series of questions. And we noticed one of the biggest differences was if they had a positive experience with a company or a negative experience with a company, that didn't matter as much. It mattered if they thought the company was putting their interests first. Was that company customer first? Because if the company was customer first, they were a lot more forgiving when the fails happened than if the company was, they felt like the company was out to get them, which we feel that way sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And I like to use that example of like, with my wife, like if we're at a good place in our marriage, I don't take the garbage out. She's very forgiving. Oh, well, he's just probably busy at work or meetings or stuff like that, right? But if we're at a bad place and I didn't take the garbage out, it's not the action, it's the motivations. And so that's where I think too, as companies, what we do when we're more customer first with our marketing, with our business, right? Then customers will be more forgiving. We see this, for example, with very companies that are seen as very innovative, tech savvy companies like the Teslas and some of this stuff, right? That some things go wrong, but if they're really pushing the envelope, they're really trying to make something good for me. Versus, like you mentioned, unfortunately, like sometimes the banking industry, insurance industry, some of these other industries, it feels like, they're out to get me. So anytime something goes wrong, they must be at fault. So that's kind of something I've noticed. I wonder if you have any experiences of, okay, like how a brand or an agency should handle a fail.
I think it's not so much a fail. I think it's more of a recognition and then evolving. So because when Fuse started, it was like the wild, wild west back then. It was a team of 7 people. You were walking into a meeting and a client said, I love the energy from you guys. Can you do this for me? And you'd walk out and you sort of say yes to the client and you walk out and you go, oh my God, I don't know if we can do this. How are we going to do this? Because you're in startup mode, but you say yes because you need to get some revenue in. And then you kind of somehow you work it out, and you go in and you deliver it. And then that kicks your agency on and your business model on that next step. So we were like that for quite a long time. And then suddenly we were like, 40 people. And you were like, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is great. And then we were 80. And you kind of get to 100 and you're like, oh, okay, hold on a minute. We need to put some processes in place here. And actually, we need a story. We need where is everyone going? If you think about, we have the red arrows in the UK, it's kind of sort of red arrows of planes going in this direction. And what is that? Because people at that time, our employees, felt that it was very we're a bit sporadic. We're going over the place. Is this just about making money? And so we spent quite a lot of time going, look, we need a unified purpose. Why are we all coming to work every day? You know, in the beginning, it was great because we were taking on the industry, we were doing something different. We were, you know, being that challenger brand. It was really exciting. And we were just like the new kids on the block. As you get to 100 employees, you're actually you're one of the big boys, big girls now. And you need to start acting like it. So that's when we put sort of, you know, what our role is in the business, how we're trying to enable clients to build their businesses through the power of sport and entertainment. You know, our ambition is to be the number one global sport and entertainment agency. We put our values in place. We'd always talked about them, you know, and coming from David, but actually putting them in place and formalizing them in everything that we do. All of that was really, really important. And I don't think I actually recognized the importance of that as well, of what a new employee coming in as an account exec at 24, what they needed at that time when you join a business of 100 people, because I had been there from the start and been on this incredibly exciting journey. I'm like, well, everyone knows what we do. So I think it's not necessarily a wrong, but I think it was definitely a wake up call to me to say, you know, what's got you from, you know, from this point of success to this point of elevated success is not necessarily going to drive the next 10 years of success. So I think that was a really big learning for me and the leadership team at the time, that you do need to listen to your employees or your customers or whatever you want to call them, to really understand, like, you're never ever going to be in that one mode. You're constantly evolving and being, as I say, one of our values is being restless. And you can't be restless for your clients if you're not being restless for your employees as well. So I think that was kind of one of the things, like, you've got to really stop and listen more than, you know, keep on going and going and going and expect everybody to be on that journey with you.
Yeah, that's great. I want to unpack that a little. That word, use that word purpose, and I want to unpack that because, like, authentic. That's another word that keeps coming up. And what does it mean? And you know, so again, that's something we try to do on How I Made It Marketing podcast. We challenge these ideas we hear. Not that I necessarily disagree with any of them, just to get underneath them. So one of the things lessons you mentioned was ignore purpose at your peril. You said you learned this from David Pennington. You mentioned earlier, the founder of Fuse. And I wanted to ask, what does purpose mean for an agency? And let me tell you why I asked this question, right? You said, like, the purpose was to be the number one global sports agency in the world, which seems like a great goal. But when we hear purpose, I mean, like a purpose in life, or sometimes, you know, we think of purpose as like, oh, there's a nonprofit that's saving the whales. Like that's a purpose, you know what I mean? And it goes back. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Silicon Valley on HBO. I don't know if you've seen that show. Have you seen that? Right. So there's this great scene where they're at like a pitch off or something like that. And every like software company comes up and they're pitching how they're saving the world. And it's like, we're here to save the world and change the world through faster, more secure virtual servers. You know what I mean? And so it seems like it's become like authentic. It's become this kind of trend over the past few decades of we've got a purpose. But that's where, let me ask, and maybe you don't have the answer to this, but I want to ask, like what does a purpose mean for an agency? Because when we think of purpose, I think a lot of times outside of the marketing world, we think of, well, it's my purpose in life, or again, like a nonprofit's purpose. I'm going to save whales or whatever that is.
Really good question, because you're right, because I think purpose has been used so much, like purpose marketing. What does that mean? Everybody's got to have a purpose. What's your purpose in your business? And I think going back to simplicity, I think, you know, the reason that we go to work is obviously to, you know, generate revenue so that we can, you know, pay people, reward great careers, obviously, you know, allow stakeholders and shareholders to reap that benefit. That's obviously a commercial purpose of why you go to work. But then in terms of, you know, why would an account exec turn up to work? They want to see that they're part of something bigger. They want to see that, you know, the ambition is to be a great pioneering agency within sport and entertainment. And actually our purpose is to move that industry on each year. And, you know, we're there to get our clients to be able to grow their businesses through the power of sport and entertainment. How we do that is done in a very purposeful way. We don't necessarily have a purpose that our business is going to be, as you say, changing, saving whales, for example, but everything we do is very purposeful. And with our employees, that's really important because we want to enable them to have the best careers possible. And that's allowing them to be the best marketeer in sport and entertainment, but giving that flexibility for them to discover what that purpose is. So, for example, you know, for me, my legacy or what I would like to do aside from my business role, is to really look at how we are moving women's health on and how I can do that through the power of sport and entertainment. So that's my purpose. I want to use my business experience and my contacts and my knowledge of sport and entertainment to help an area on women's fertility that is not being serviced yet. And that's my purpose, and allowing my business time to give me enough time to be able to do that. So, for example, my other colleague who is really, really involved in female leadership, and she's using all of her experience through Fuse and Omnicom to enable other female leaders in other businesses to really learn from what we're doing to accelerate more females in senior positions across different industries. So I think that for me is really important, being able to have a really clear ambition in the workplace commercially and for your clients and the product, but enabling people to have the confidence and flexibility to allow them to be purposeful in other parts of their life, and giving them that little kind of time to do that as well, using the experience that they're building from their time at Fuse with us to go and do that.
So that's really interesting. I want to ask you what that means at the agency level in a minute, but at the personal level, like, is that a formalized process or system you have set up for your employees where they outline their purpose and one-on-ones or annual reviews or something? Because that's something really interesting you mentioned. Like, as marketers, we build these skill sets, these wonderful and powerful skill sets, which we often use to promote a brand, through sports marketing or banks or whatever. But those same skill sets are very helpful for helping with women's fertility or all these other issues that we talk about. I think a challenge often, either in our careers within a company or just separately our careers, is we don't often do a good job of articulating, right? Like, what, to your point, what is our purpose? What am I trying to do here on this mortal coil, or whatever the term is, in my life and with these skills? Right. So is there like what you're talking about, is that something that you're generally trying to infuse in your agency, or have you formalized any processes for each employee to kind of outline, hey, here's a purpose I have, and here's how I'm trying to use these skill sets within and without Infuse to make that happen?
So two parts to that question. So the first part is that from an agency point of view, I mean, we have a very strong strategy about getting more people from different backgrounds into sport and entertainment. So we'll work with different partners to bring in people from different backgrounds into Fuse through different like partnerships and internships and things like that. And we've also partnered with, I'm not sure if you've heard of Stormzy, an artist who big kind of successful rapper in the UK, is partnered up with Adidas, and he's done some amazing work with these creative houses across London, where you can go in as somebody who may not have access to recording studios or how to edit social content. So we've partnered with them. So we're labeling people who want to be part of Stormzy and Adidas's project to then come through to Fuse as well. So that's a big overall collective of like, how do we get more people? Let's democratize the sports marketing industry. Let's get more people from different backgrounds into our business and help them have a different pathway into our business, because the more people you have from different parts of life, it's going to reflect the real Britain or the real Europe that we live in. And that's going to be better for our workforce, our business, our clients' business. So that's one part. I think the second part is that we're living in really different and changing times, and I think the younger generation are coming in, and they've got really different expectations of what a job should be now, and they want to do more of their own projects. They want to have more of their own, a legacy essentially. And I think we're just starting to trial some ideas of how that could work. And back to the point around my passion point, this is what I would like to do using my experience for a pro bono project, or my CFO's experience in women's leadership and how she can help more people. How can we potentially formalize that? I'm not saying that we're going to 100% do that, but we are starting to trial with how can we retain great talent in the business by enabling them to feel like they have, they're using their knowledge and experience and helping others. And I think it's really important. And it was Martin Luther King Day on Monday, I think it was. And
right.
One of his quotes popped up, which really resonated with me. And I think it's the most important thing that you need to do in the world is think about how you're helping others. And it really resonated with me because, not enough of that is being done. And I think if we can enable a workforce and environment where we can foster that, I think that's only going to help us commercially. It's going to help our product. It's going to help our clients. We're going to keep some great people.
That's great. And so talking about some of the people, so you talk about the clients you've worked with, the people you work with in your agencies, but some of the people you've been around in your career too are some pretty famous athletes, right? You've been around them when they've been at the heights of fame. You've been around them in the early days. And so I asked you of all those kind of famous athletes, I'm sure you've learned a lot from many of them. Is there
Yeah.
anyone that really stands out to you of someone you learned something with? And you mentioned that you knew Lewis Hamilton early in his career. And what really stood out to you is how he would say it how it is from the very beginning. So can you share kind of what you experienced with Lewis Hamilton and kind of how that shaped your career?
Yes, absolutely. I just saw him, amazing photographs. He's just joined the Ferrari F1 team, and that was in on social yesterday. And so I was privileged enough to work with Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso back in, goodness, it must have been 2007 when I joined Vodafone Global, and they were the two drivers for the Vodafone McLaren Mercedes team. And it was at such a brilliant time in F1. And it was Lewis's first season back then. And it was actually, so we started Formula One at the same time. Obviously, his career has done way better than mine.
He drives a little faster than you, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. But we had the pleasure from a partner perspective, from being title partner, working with him just when he started. And he was incredible. He was obviously a young driver, but I always remember this humility that he had and this sort of real kind of say it how it is and be true to yourself. Even back then, this confidence that he had within him to do the right thing and to say what he believed was the right thing. Even back then, when he was coming in as a rookie driver, he had the world's press over him. And he just had this real sort of center within him of, I'm going to do the right thing. And for me, I look at his career over the last, 20 years or so, and he's always withheld that. And I think that's incredibly admirable. And I try and really instill that. There's a cricket term which people use back in the UK, and it's everything with a straight bat. And again, I think that's a nice expression to go, okay, I'm in a difficult situation. What do I do? And I always go, okay, remember Lewis Hamilton, or I remember that cricket term. And you always go, right, okay, if you're honest, then, you're doing the right thing.
So let me unpack that too. So this might be the hardest question to answer someone in charge of sponsorship. So I save it for the very end. And it's about what happens when the sponsorships go wrong. Okay. Because you mentioned say it how it is from the very beginning. And that's just a great reminder of these are human beings also they're not brands. They're not just brands, all these things. They're human beings who do want to say it how it is. And when they say it how it is, it might not be the message you want your brand to have out there in the world, even though you've started having this kind of partnership where they've been a spokesperson in certain ways. And I think about, you mentioned just a few minutes ago about Adidas and Stormzy, a rapper in the UK, which I'm not familiar with. But when you mentioned that Adidas, the rapper I thought about was Kanye West, right? And obviously, Kanye West came out and said anti-Semitic things. And then Adidas made a choice. And from what I can see, I'm not in the sponsorship industry, the sports entertainment sponsorship industry, they gave up millions, hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars to step away from that Kanye West sponsorship because they didn't think it was the right thing for their brand and their company. So when it comes to this, say it how it is, do you have any, if you have an example you can mention, that's great. I know that might be hard because I don't want to put you on the spot to say something negative, but do you have any final advice for brands, marketers listening about, okay, we set up the sponsorship with a sports or entertainment professional. Obviously, we're trying to get a certain thing out of it. We're trying to get, some of their sunshine shining on our brand so people buy stuff, but say it how it is. They're human beings too, and may say things that we disagree with from our brand. What do you do from that point on?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I can't necessarily think of that's a situation where that's happened to us or one of our clients. I think maybe good briefing and selection of ambassadors.
Well done.
Look, I think, humans are humans. There's always going to be times where there's human error or bad judgment. That's just nature, isn't it? I think that's why you have incredibly strong contracts. I think as you go through negotiation and contracting of some of these ambassadors, this is where the criteria selection becomes so important because of the way that we consume information now. Through so many different forms of social media, things happen so quickly. So I think we have to be really robust in that selection criteria. We work very closely with, lawyers, to understand like what we need and what we don't need. And I think, saying it how it is having a perspective on the world for me. It's kind of, I think with Lewis Hamilton, he's very passionate about his Mission 44 charity. He's incredibly passionate around, equality in the world, getting more equality into sport. And for me, that's the important side. With someone like Kiani, of course, saying some awful things, that is not okay. And that should be, you should disassociate yourself with something like that. But I think it is doing your due diligence right from the front. What do these people really stand for? How does that actually match with your brand criteria is really, really important. And I think the more homework that you can do up front, then you will have a proper partnership with that celebrity or ambassador who really understands the brand's needs as well. And I think that's a really important piece of having true collaboration. So they understand what you're trying to get to and where they're trying to get to, and how you can, have the 1+1=3 factor and create some really great impact with that partnership and investment.
Yeah, and that's great not to overlook the partnership and collaboration part. You're not just looking for a big megaphone, right? You're looking for that right voice for your brand.
Yeah. And I think that's more and more is happening because you've got, all of these athletes or influencers and creators are becoming more like producers now. And, they want to do more. They're very selective with who they partner now as well. They're not just taking money as oh, great, that's money for the bank. They're very protective on who they are partnering with. And it's got to be something that really resonates with their issues that they're trying to change as well. So I think that's a big change recently. It's not transactional. It's, they want to do something that's complementary to where they're trying to get to.
And yet, let me actually ask you, I thought it was a final question. One more, and then we'll get into a wrap-up question. But also, like, has this changed? You've been doing this for decades. Has this changed in your career too? Because one thing I've noticed, we're talking about rappers. I mentioned, there's a great Jay-Z quote I love. He said, "I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman." And one thing I've noticed, not just at the biggest star level, like the Lewis Hamilton level, but even for all these influencers, right now, everyone looks at their personal image as a business and they manage it differently, right? Like it was fairly novel. Michael Jordan and, some Joe Namath, some other athletes back in the day, they were athletes. I mean, primarily, I think maybe Jordan somewhat changed that with the Air Jordan and stuff moving with Nike, but they were athletes and, oh, hey, I'm drinking this soda, or I'm wearing these shoes or whatever. But fast forward to where we are now decades later, not only at the big level, Lewis Hamilton level, someone with maybe 1,000 followers on TikTok, like they look at themselves not as a businessman. I'm a business. This is my business.
Yeah.
And so they're making a partnership with another business. So I just wondered, I don't know if I have any good way to articulate that question, but have you noticed this transformation over the decades you've been in this industry?
Oh yeah, definitely. And you can understand why everybody has been in uproar about TikTok closing in the US because, these influencers, that's one of their biggest channels for their business as their personality. So you can understand why there is this backlash of trying to stop TikTok operating in the US. Yeah, definitely. I think it helps because there is this huge trend where clients, consumers, customers, whatever you want to call them, people or fans, let's just go back to fans, they are interested in multiple cultures kind of crossing over, bleeding into each other. So if you look at how, gaming is now taking inspiration from movies is taking inspiration from games. You've got, I'm not just a soccer fan, I am a soccer and music and lifestyle fan. The NBA do it fantastically, this whole cross-culture piece, and they have done for years in terms of, music and fashion. So I think an athlete comes in and he's like, oh my God, there's an audience of, I'm a soccer fan and I can commercialize my fan base of just, soccer fans. But actually, because I'm wearing the latest Louis Vuitton, I can tap into that fashion audience as well. That's another whole lot of fans that I can commercialize. So I think they're really clever. They're really astute. They are, they're looking at those brand extensions. Okay, how can I expand my audience? How can I make more money out of me being in more genres? And actually, that's what people are wanting. They want to see this cross culture coming through.
All right, well, let me ask you the final question. So we talked a lot about them, these big athletes and people we can sponsor. Let's talk about us now. When it comes down to it, through all your stories, there have been a lot of things that come out through all the difficult macro and micro times we can go through. If you had to break it down, though, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
So I think the key qualities of being an effective marketer is being empathetic. It's being really curious around your audiences and what the future of those audiences is going to look like, being really committed to having the best campaigns. And I think as well, just having a sort of real kind of, committed spirit as well. I think too many marketeers try things or do too many quick test and learn and throw it out the water. I think sort of being committed to, to doing things really well. And I think that's what you're starting to see, actually, some big brand campaigns coming back into sports marketing. That's really exciting. So I think those are the kind of the qualities that I would be looking for great marketeers.
I like that. I've asked this question many times at this point. We've done a lot of these podcasts. Committed spirit. That's a first one. I realize we hear a lot of things repeat. Committed spirit is a brand new one. So thank you very much, Louise. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing all your stories today. I've learned so much from you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the show. And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.